friends, my name is Marines, and today I'll be wrapping up all of the books that I read in October. When I first started BookTube, I was doing monthly wrap-ups, and then I switched to doing wrap-ups a few books at a time. Unfortunately, I found that it is, I think, a little more time intensive to keep up with my reading that way, and I just haven't been in a position to keep up with it. Every year I end the year without having wrapped up all of the books that I read, and so as I was faced with like being behind again on wrapping up books and deciding which books I wanted to talk about, I thought maybe switching back to the monthly format might help me in terms of keeping up with wrapping up my books and feeling like there was less to do on my to-do list. I'm not sure how long I'll continue to do it monthly. I kind of want to test out the waters and see if this is what feels right for me at this point. That said, October was a fantastic reading month. This year in general has been a really good reading year. I always set my reading goal in 3 parts, which I know that I've mentioned before. My real goal is 52 books in a year. I always set that goal because it helps me time manage. So reading is important to me, and I want to make sure that I'm carving out enough time in my schedule for reading, and to me enough time between balancing work and social media and, you know, scrolling and other ways that I decompress like TV and movies and things. That's a book a week. 52 books in a year is where I know that I'm putting in the time that I want to be putting into reading. I always set a second tier goal of 72 books per year, which is usually like my average, and then my stretch goal is 100 books. I've never read 100 books in a year. It is slightly too much for me, except for right now as I'm recording this in November, I'm at 81 books and we still have all of November and December. So I'm feeling like this may be the year that I actually reach 100 books read in a year, which is great. So I've had a really great reading year in general. I also had a very fantastic start to October in terms of good luck with books and having a string of 4 to 5 star books. So let's get into the books that I've read. First up is Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is mythology-inspired fantasy with elements of historical fiction. I got my copy from Book of the Month. This was my July 2019 pick, and I picked it because I've read 2 other books by Moreno-Garcia, Signal to Noise and Certain Dark Things, and I loved both of those. After reading this, I can say that she is certainly shaping up to be one of my favorite authors. This book is about a girl named Cassiopeia who works for her rich grandfather and sort of spends her time daydreaming about getting out of the situation that she's in. It seems to her that she'll never be able to escape that life until she discovers a mysterious box amongst her grandfather's things, and when she opens it, she releases the Mayan god of death. He asks for her help in recovering his throne from his brother, who tricked him into being captured in the first place, and if Cassiopeia doesn't help, it could lead to her death, and if she does help, the god of death promises her a new life. This was wonderful and magical and had the sorts of sad undertones that I think are the backbone of any good fairy tale. This did start off a little bit slower to me, but the deeper into the story I got, the more it felt purposeful and meaningful. I love the way that Moreno-Garcia marries together the known and the unknown in her stories. So here you have kind of the jazz age and the historical element of it, and she just marries it so well with the Mayan mythology, and she makes both of these things feel very tangible. If you are a fan of Death and the Maiden stories, I feel like this would very much appeal to you. It doesn't exactly have a happy ending, but it has a very satisfying one, and one that makes complete sense with the story that she was telling. This was beautiful, it was haunting, it is a coming of age story, and it's laced with the kind of grief that you get from growing up, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Sabrina and Karina by Fajardo-Anstine. This is a collection of short stories that focuses specifically on Latinas of indigenous ancestry in Colorado. I always try to read a few short story collections per year. I enjoy them, but I feel like I'm pretty picky about them as well, and I think that they're difficult to pull off correctly. I like collections that feel very well curated, that have some sort of underlying theme or something that connects each story to the other in a very strong way. I like short stories that either feel complete or that build you to the height of something, either a plot or an emotion, and leaves you off in that place for a very specific reason. It has to feel like the author is doing something by doing that and not just leaving a story undone because it's a short story. Sabrina and Karina did all of that. These were stories that were so strongly connected by the women that populate it, by the location, by the area, and just by the themes that tied all of these stories of grief, of the communities that these women belong to, of trying to break the cycles of poverty and abuse and how difficult that is, and of surviving systems that are built up against these women. This was, I will say, difficult to read at times for me. I had to read it slowly, and that was a very personal experience, but it is why I ended up docking half a star from it. Even though I feel like it was purposeful for me personally, I would have liked to see a few more glimmers of hope within these stories. Overall though, this was a super impressive set of short stories, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, Light from Other Stars by Erika Swyler. This is speculative fiction following a girl named Neda Papas in 2 timelines. One is in 1986 in a small Space Coast town in Florida, and at the very beginning of the story, Neda watches the Challenger blow up. Both of Neda's parents are scientists, and she grows up in a place that is very much influenced by NASA and by space. So we see how this really affects her, but it also is a launching point for her to like learn and discover other things that are happening within her town and within her family. Her father is a scientist who was laid off by NASA, and both of her parents are dealing with the loss of a newborn baby, a baby boy that they had lost a few years prior, and Neda's father has become obsessed with this idea that he can invent something that can prolong Neda's childhood. We jump in the story forward to Neda as an adult, realizing her dreams of going into space, and so we see her life aboard the spacecraft that she's on, and her crew is also dealing with a critical disruption to their mission and trying to figure out a way to deal with it and to survive. I love this so much. It is also a very slow story because of the way that the author jumps back and forth between the 2 timelines. She lays down the separate mysteries of each time so that you're quickly wondering how and if these 2 things, these 2 times in Neda's life connect. And while both timelines have a sort of internal urgency, the author is in no rush to get anywhere. This is also very science-filled writing. I loved all of those details, all of the science-y details surrounding space and space travel, and also like the fabric of time and what all of that entails, but I feel like they might be details that will be too much for other readers. I thought it very much fed into the air of wonder that surrounds the story. I once did a video about space as a setting and what it allows authors to explore, and I think here space feeds that atmosphere of wonder, but it is also representative of a lot of themes of the story, including loneliness and grief, and the way you can be lonely in your grief even when surrounded by others. Another big theme of the story is kind of the family and family dynamics. Neda is very much closer to her father. She doesn't understand her mother or her mother's behavior, but it is her mother Bethine who comes to the rescue in terms of the problems that her father creates in the past. And at the end of the day, I feel like my heart went out the most to Bethine the chemist and the baker and the mother, and arguably the hero of this story. Like I said, I love this. I thought it was so strange and a very unique sort of story, and I ended up giving this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This is a historical romance, which I also got from my Book of the Month subscription, and this was my September 2019 pick. In the story, we follow Annabelle Archer, who has earned her place amongst the first female cohort at Oxford on a scholarship, and the only stipulation is that she has to volunteer for the women's suffragette movement, recruiting men of influence to their cause, and that's how she crosses paths with Sebastian Devereux, the Duke of Montgomery, as she worms her way into an invitation for a party at his estate. Sebastian is almost immediately and very attracted to Annabelle, but he's looking for a wife that is his social equal, and Annabelle is determined not to lose her head or to compromise her reputation. And so these 2 people want very different things from their relationship, but they also can't seem to stay away from each other. I really enjoyed this, and I enjoyed the way that it balanced the romance with other elements of the plot. I loved Annabelle for being so smart, but also for being kind of emotional and being apt to losing herself to her feelings and her attraction to the Duke. Through her, the story got to explore a lot of themes of like safety and independence, not only in the historical setting, but also in the setting of a relationship. Sometimes when stories rely on the two main characters being the main thing that is standing in the way of the relationship, I get frustrated, but here I really understood both of their hang-ups. His legacy and her reputation were like, they felt like real reasons not to move forward, but at the same time, because of their chemistry and their banter and the way that these two characters were fleshed out, I also understood why they just couldn't keep away from each other. This is a great debut, and I feel like this is a historical romance with a lot of crossover appeal because it does tackle some of those elements or additional plot things of like the suffragette movement and things of that nature, and I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, The Right Swipe by Alisha Ray. This is a contemporary romance, and I bought a physical copy of this because it was when the hurricane was coming, not in October, but before that point, and I went to my mom's house with nothing physical to read, no physical books, and so I thought, if the lights go out, like, I'm stuck. So we went on a Target run for some other things, and I ended up picking up this book because I had seen it around, not really knowing much about it, except for that it was based on a dating app. So what it is the main character, Rhiannon, has actually started a dating app as a company, and she's super successful, but she has her eyes set on buying out a competitive company, a more traditional non-app based dating website. So she wants to add that under the umbrella of her company, and the spokesman, the new spokesman for that competitive business, is a man that she's had a one-night stand with. So she actually met him on her own app, and they had a great night, and they decided to meet up again the next day, but he ghosted her. He never showed up, and so she's very against giving him a second chance, but because of their business dealings, they are thrown together once again. I think this might be one of my favorite contemporary romances that I've ever read. I read through reviews after I finished reading it, and I think people's main complaint is that it had a lot of messages and that the messages felt heavy-handed, but to me, this tackled a lot of things that felt relevant. It talks about like unsolicited nude pictures, and it talked about dating online, and it talked about trusting after a failed relationship, and the main male character is also an ex-football player, so it talks a lot about like football related injuries and things of that nature. That was one piece that I didn't know a lot and that didn't feel like super relatable, but it was still really interesting to read about, kind of in the midst of everything that was going on within their relationship. I think people might also be ruffled by Rhiannon, but I loved her character, and I think that the book does try to tackle this idea that because she is a professional and because she acts in a cool, level-headed way, that she's cold, but she never read cold to me. In a lot of ways, not only is she being professional, but she's protecting herself after things in her past. So I just really liked reading about her, and I like that she is a successful and self-assured character. Samson, the love interest, was perfect. He was so sweet, and it was really refreshing to have the male character in the story be the one who was immediately invested in the relationship. Like, he knew from the beginning that he wanted to be in a relationship with Rhiannon, and that never changed, but he was also very respectful of her boundaries, and you know, you never want to hand out cookies for things like consent, but it was just so well navigated in the story, and it's a shame that we have to still point that out, but I loved the way that they tackled this. I love the way that he respected her wishes, from the little things even to like what he called her or nicknames or things like that. The example that comes to my head is the Raven Boys. I can't even remember what the main character there calls Blue. It's a name that she doesn't even want, Jane or something. He just picks it and starts calling her that. It annoys me so flippin' much. Christian Grey does it in 50 Shades of Grey, and after Hardin does it to Tessa, he calls her Teresa even though she doesn't want to be called that. So it's just like a pet peeve of mine. So in this book, when Rhiannon was like, don't call me that, call me this, and he just immediately does, It was so great. I honestly cried at one point while reading this, and it was specifically while she was navigating the storyline of sexual harassment. It's just something that hit very close to home. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Next up is The Collected Schizophrenias by Esme Weijun Wang. This is a collection of essays about Wang's road to a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, and it talks a lot about her mental health, about the stigma around the collected schizophrenias, and just her relationship with her parents, with her significant other, and just how her entire experience with mental health and mental illness has affected her life. She just also has a really unique perspective as a person. She used to work in fashion, but she's also a scientist, and the way that she writes the essays is just really intriguing and really interesting. This comes with a huge content warning for very frank discussion of mental illness. There were moments where reading this was sort of overwhelming for me, and I had to take a step back from it, but in a way that it was just very raw and very real. I listened to this on audiobook, and it was narrated by the author, which is one of my favorite ways to listen to nonfiction, if the audiobook is narrated by the author. Doing that, it really immerses you in the author's experience, and that was true here for this collection of essays. I also really like nonfiction that has a narrative bent, and while this was certainly very information heavy, and it includes like a lifetime of experience and of research, and she very much does have that like research focused mind, she weaves in a lot of her own personal stories about her childhood and about her, like I said, her road to diagnosis, so I thought it was very well balanced. This is something that I know will sit in my brain for a very long time. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. After reading all of those books, I also did a bunch of rereading in the month of October. First up, The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This was the Snark Squad book club pick for September, and we also did a podcast episode on this with guest star Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. If you know Sam, you know that this is her favorite book of all time. I also loved it. Nicole also loved it. It was a pleasure to reread this. This is a book that when I first read it, I think I gave it 3.5 or 4 out of 5 stars. So I totally understand why it doesn't connect with everybody. I think that in being super dreamlike and in hazy, it builds kind of a separation between you and the main characters. It was only on reread that I understood that a lot of what I felt like I was missing from the plot and the characters is built into the circus itself. The author does a lot of just like plot and character work in her setting, which is absolutely amazing. This reread, I was super struck by how sad and somber this is, and how the author shows you just how dark that the circus is, and you still are left with this feeling of like, yeah, but I want to go there. This is just one of my favorite books, and I love going back into this world, and every time that I do, I feel like I discover something different. So while this was initially like a 4-star read for me, it is certainly a 5-star read now that I've read it 3 times. I also reread the first 5 books in the Kate Daniels series. I had read all of those books before, and my intention was to reread to continue with the series, and I am currently reading the 6th book, so we'll see if I make it from 6 to 10, but I enjoyed the heck out of rereading the first 5. I talk about these books a lot in my last reading vlog, so I won't repeat myself a ton here. This is urban fantasy paranormal fiction about a mercenary for hire named Kate Daniels, who gets involved in a lot of the mysteries of this Atlanta, this alternate Atlanta, in which magic and technology kind of battle each other and come in waves. So when magic wave hits, technology is down, and when technology is up, the magic kind of recedes. And so it's super interesting. Vampires and werewolves and all kinds of monsters exist in this world. A big portion of the story is not only Kate and who she is and her parentage and her identity and her own magic, but also her relationship with the Beast Lord, the man who heads up the shapeshifter pack in Atlanta. So this has a lot of elements that are, I feel like, tropes of the genre, but they are done super well. They're addictive, they're easy to read, and Kate Daniels is hands down one of my favorite female characters now. She is just so snarky, and she is a badass for sure, but she has such a strong sense of morality and of doing right and of protecting those that she loves, and she 100% forms a found family around herself. And every book you get another little piece of this found family, from a girl that she adopts to her best friend to an attack poodle. Like, it is just so much fun, and I'm having even more fun rereading them. I think I was a little more critical the first time that I read them, but as with happens, I kind of knew exactly what I was getting getting into when I started rereading them, and they were perfect for the reading mood that I was in. I read them on the plane, during travel, and it's just been a blast. I think I've rated all of these 4 out of 5 stars, so it's been like a consistent enjoyable experience. I also reread Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones, again with the intent of finishing off the 2 books that follow it. One is a companion and one is a sequel. If you guys have ever seen any of those games or memes that are like, you know, pick 3 characters that describe you, I'm terrible at those, but I have to remember that Sophie under an old curse is like my Patronus, honestly. She is just fantastic, and I love the way that being old, like how she just goes with it. She's like, I'm old now, I guess I'm crotchety, and it's just perfect. She stands her ground against Howl, who, you know, you don't enjoy him for a good majority of the story. He's very self-centered, and there's things going on with his plot as well that make him act the way that he's acting, but you don't know that for a portion of the story, so you're just like cheering Sophie on. Your heart also goes out to Sophie because she doesn't think that she does good, and she's been kind of indoctrinated with this idea that because she's the firstborn, she'll never amount to anything. So I don't know, I love Sophie, and by the end I really enjoy Howl and another found family in this story, which is always great. So this is super magical. I love this. 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I reread was A Study in Charlotte by Brittany Cavallaro, and this is a Sherlock Holmes retelling of sorts. So it follows Charlotte Holmes and Jamie Watson, who are descendants of the famous Sherlock and Watson, and they are together at a boarding school in Connecticut for various reasons, and a fellow student of theirs ends up murdered, and they are the prime suspects. When I originally read this, I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I reread it and the second book, which I'll talk about in my November wrap-up, and hate is a strong word, but I truly dislike this, and I am struggling to understand what the appeal is. I mean, I guess I got it at one point because it was like a 3.5 star read for me, but on reread, these 2 main characters are completely, I keep saying the word insufferable, but they're insufferable to me. I don't understand why we're supposed to care. I really dislike Jamie as kind of our entry point into the story. He is immediately obsessed with Charlotte, and he feels very possessive, and their whole relationship is just kind of gross because of the way that he is obsessive and possessive. I don't know. I'm letting my feelings about the second book, which I disliked a lot more, kind of color this one in retrospect. This one was fine. It was better than the second book, I guess because you're not so deep into the relationship that I just absolutely hate. But yeah, this was not good on reread, and I downgraded this to a 2 out of 5 stars. So this was the only book in October that I ended up reading and not really enjoying. I can't complain much about that. That's it for me today. Let's chat down in the comments if you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, or a little bit about your October reading. What was your favorite thing that you read in October? Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.